Today on Straight Talk about Smart Food, the gray area of going green. We're diving into sustainability and its complexities. And there's a guest in the pod who knows his way around the science of sustainability. Make it simple for me, please.
This is Straight Talk about Smart Food, a podcast about that fascinating place where food and science intersect.
Hello, and welcome to Straight Talk about Smart Food. We're here in our pod today, and I'm Yvette Hirang. I'm the Culinary Innovations Manager of MGP.
I'm Rachel Matasic, Senior Scientist in Ingredient Innovation here at MGP.
So, Rachel, I can tell this is going to be one of my favorite episodes because we let in a stranger.
Danger.
We let an outsider in our pod mafia. And I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Logan Thompson. I'm an assistant professor at Kansas State University, specializing in sustainable beef production. And I'm here today because your colleague here pays my mortgage, and so I would like that to keep happening.
Great. I'm glad to have you here.
That's how we obtained him, is I have connections, marital connections.
Good job. Well, I'm glad that you guys are here. We're going to talk about sustainability. And so we want to pick your brain. I want to pick your brain about the topic. So we're going to talk about what it is in a nutshell and what are the misconceptions in sustainability.
Yeah, so just kind of starting off with what it is, just zooming all the way out a 10,000-foot view, sustainability is a very complex thing. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? So narrowing it down is very tough for folks, but in general, we think of it as having three main pillars. So think like legs on a stool, right? So you have an economic stool or economic leg, a societal or social leg, and then an environmental leg. And the nexus of where all those come together, that is what we consider a sustainable outcome.
Okay. Care to expound on that? Because that's way over my expertise here.
So how do they play into each other, I think? Like, what can we look at something and say, like, something says, now sustainably produced. What does that mean for those three legs?
Yeah, so that's, again, a bit of what makes this complex. So we would consider sustainability to be a wicked problem in that each individual stakeholder defines what a sustainable outcome is for them. Right, so if I'm thinking a beef producer, say, and we're in Northeast Kansas right now, well, a sustainable outcome for them is transitioning that ranch onto the next generation. They would say that's a sustainable operation to them. A food company, they're often looking at greenhouse gas emissions, right? So a sustainable product to them means potentially, like on the beef side, something that's produced with, say, 10% less greenhouse gas emissions. I'll use that as an example because I know that product's on the market.
So if everyone's kind of saying or defining their own sustainability, then how are we really gauging like what is sustainable? Because maybe something is saying like, okay, now made with 50% more recyclable product. And really they only increased it from like 2 to 3%. So that's not really in the grand scheme of things like a huge hit on sustainability. So how can we as consumers say like, oh, okay, I'm going to make this initiative for myself and I'm trusting like, oh, okay, this package is made with sustainable products, or now this is using less water in the processing, so it's more sustainable. How can I gauge that when I'm at the grocery store and I'm trying to make that?
Who's overseeing this? Who's creating the guidelines?
Yeah, so it's a bit of the Wild West out there, especially during COVID. We saw that something called ESG investments or environmental social governance investments was outpacing the S&P 500 during COVID-19, especially those first couple of years. So companies all started making commitments around sustainability, right? And to Rachel's point, there's a lot now on the grocery store shelf. When you walk down, everything has some sort of sustainability claim on it. At least it feels that way to me. The bad news is nobody
When I drag
really,
you to the grocery store with me?
Do you guys look at the back of the package like, is this sustainable? Is that triangle on anywhere here on this package?
No. In our household, we're like, what is the cheapest and how much can we get for our buck?
See, that's another question of mine, like sustainability. And you said the economic implications, like, is it expensive on a producer
Well, we
side,
gotta go
on
back.
the
I
consumer
interrupted
Yes,
the
the-
original
Oh, sorry.
Let's go
question.
back to who's overseeing this,
Okay.
right? So companies have made all these claims. They're also starting to get investments around their sustainability reporting. So say like the company that y'all work for, MGP, reports to a global entity, GRI, Global Resource Initiative. Is that what it is? Research Initiative, perhaps? So they report their greenhouse gas emissions, which is one of the pillars of MGP's sustainability portfolio. There's other platforms out there. SASB is a newer one. There's also the Carbon Disclosure Project that companies report to. They get scores based on how, quote, sustainable they are. The bad part is there's not a lot of auditing around it, right? And that's where it kind of becomes the Wild West, and we get into this whole issue of greenwashing. So companies making a claim where they don't actually back up, right? So kind of greenwashing the reputation of their products, and hopefully at some point the consumers figure that out, and there's some, potentially some negative ramifications of that.
So there's no greenwashing police. There's no one out there saying, no, that's not really sustainable.
Not yet. There's companies, there's NGOs that look into it and try to report on that. But in terms of an organized structure, that is lagging behind, yes. There are certain regions of, let's say, the world who participate in carbon disclosure projects or something like that. And it's just a known deal that those regions report funny math. And when you try to audit it, you're like, where in the heck are they getting these numbers from?
What are these numbers?
Yeah, based on your yield, your numbers are not this, right? It's a known issue in the space of sustainability.
But it seems like it's gotten pretty deep as the years go on. Like almost every company has the sustainability initiative. And in the food industry, like in our industry, food science, and in your industry, what do you think is the most important step or initiative for food production that's sustainable? An example.
Yeah, and I would say that we're all in the grand scheme of things in the same industry, right? We're working on producing food, producing protein in my case for a growing
Mass
population.
Feeding the people.
Right. Yeah, and one of the key things for me is I like to remind people think local. This was a saying when I was a kid, and it's kind of the first sustainability saying I remember is think global, act local, right? So consider your local issues in your environment, right, and make changes there. When I look at the history of the United States and our land management, I think, man, we have a really bad issue with soil management. And so if we can make steps to improve soil health, make steps to improve soil health across many regions in the United States, I think we can do a lot of good, not just for greenhouse gas emissions or carbon sequestration, but overall health of our surrounding ecosystems. Right? I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably familiar, but the Gulf of Mexico, every year now, there's a red tide and there's huge fish die-offs. A lot of that's coming from agricultural runoff.
Really?
Right? So if we can take care of our soils, I think we can do a lot of good.
Well, from land, it flows over to the ocean.
It
So,
flows
like-
into the Mississippi, Ohio, and Missouri waterways, and then eventually down into the Gulf of Mexico.
That's why there's a huge bout of research going on right now about cover crops. So like my PhD research was about a cover crop called pennycress, which is like related to canola. So it's planted in the fall over typically fallow land, or naked land as we can call it. It roots and rosettes, or it creates some sort of root system within there. And then it winters over and then will spring up in the spring, no pun intended again. And what that does is it fixes the soil and it reduces soil erosion. It reduces runoff nitrate into the water systems. And
Puts back nutrients in
Yeah.
the soil.
so we want to use these cover crops, but how can we utilize them? And then can we utilize them in a 2-crop rotation system within that land? And so some initiatives like this, I think, are huge, especially when we look, again, at the grand scheme of things of like, okay, there's little things we can do and things we can focus our research efforts on to be able to say, okay, we can make this part of the production more sustainable, and that has bigger implications than just, okay, let's reduce our water here, or let's reduce our waste here, which those things are really, really good, but I think starting in the beginning and looking at things that can trickle down. A lot of these cover crops, especially the one I looked at, which was pennycress, it's related to canola. And so it produces these small oil seeds that actually have appreciable amounts of oil, protein, and fiber. So if we can utilize each of those, which the oil is currently used as a feedstock for biofuels, but then we have this proteinaceous press cake that's left over after the pressing of this seed, and we can utilize the protein from this oil seed to nourish our bodies, use it for food, make a food ingredient out of it, utilize the nutritional and functional benefits from this ingredient. But then you also have the fiber. Can we make a dietary fiber out of that? Can we also use that in food systems? So going back to, we can get the environmental sustainable benefits out of these cover crops and then also utilize them and add high value to these crops and have maybe we make it more than just a feedstock for biofuels. Maybe we can use it as a finishing oil or a cooking oil or other ways to then utilize what's coming out of these crops. And then it's a full cycle and we have less waste then there in the end.
Yeah, and you hit on a great point there. So I often get calls. I just had one before I walked down into your pod. Thanks again for having me, about carbon sequestration and what can we do in rangelands. Well, not everything is practical everywhere, and Rachel hit on a good point. Cover crops are a great tool. How can we have producers utilize them more frequently? And by that, I mean, how can we make them economically advantageous to include in an operation? Right, so I think to Rachel's point, there's a lot of research that needs to be done at how to upcycle and incorporate more of these cover cropping systems into more
utilize
regions.
them.
Yep.
Because you don't want to have a bunch of cover crops and then a bunch of the utilization of these cover crops go to waste and then you have a whole cycle. So I think it's really looking at maintaining all of this. You can tell our house is a lot of fun. We talk about...
Oh, I bet. So you mentioned cover crops. Is that in the same category as crop rotation? Like the purpose of why we're doing, or like
It's different.
What is it doing to our soil? Is it the same?
So like I said, with like cover crops, it does help a little bit in that initiative to like add variety to the soil and change things a little bit. But that's really used as a cover crop, and it can be called like a 2-crop rotation, but it's really in the same crop year. So like those cover crops, you want like a shorter season,
Like
and they
how
get
long?
harvested. They would be harvested like early June. So that's when like your other crops are starting to come up. So you would interseed them within your crop on the same field and then harvest at different times. So you would get 2 different crops off of the same
At the
piece of
same
land. So
time.
you're increasing your efficiency and then also having this more sustainable approach. But what you're talking about with crop rotation, I think traditionally is more about maybe one piece of land, you grow corn, and then the next year you grow soybeans. Am I?
Yeah, exactly. That's the most common crop rotation here in the Midwest, right? Is a corn,
We see it even
soybean.
just around our house.
Yeah,
is like
corn,
they
soybean
rotate
rotation.
it.
And the thought behind that is, and the reasoning people do it, is those plants provide different things or require different things from your soil. So like corn, it's very, let's call it resource intensive, right? So it takes a lot of nitrogen, takes a lot of water, right, to grow, whereas other crops will fix nitrogen into the soil, put it back into the soil. So when you have that rotation, you're taking inputs, but you're also providing them back, right, and still getting a harvest. So that's commonly why those rotations are done.
Okay, so I need to talk to all these corn farms because my drive to and from work, I drive by like 5 or
Just all
6
corn.
corn plantations. And every year it's the same corn, corn, corn. There's a lot of misconception. A lot of people are confused, including me. I admit to that. Organically grown vegetables or any plants and sustainability. So it's like MGP also is in the alcohol business. So I'll use this analogy like all bourbons are whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon. Can we say the same for all organically grown products are sustainable or?
Yeah, so organic is it's a production method that comes with a marketing label, right? And it's rigorously it's rigorously inspected, those facilities, by USDA and other organizations to ensure that organic practices are being followed. It even has a window where you transitioning to organic where you're not an organic producer. So it takes a long time to get certified and to begin to sell products
It's a
as organic.
strenuous certifying body.
Yes. And organic can be sustainable in some parts of the country and for some producers. On the cropping side, organic means that you're going to till your ground a lot commonly. Not all do that, but commonly we see our organic farmers having to till a lot, and that's because they have weed control issues. So tillage is a way to control those weeds because they can't use, herbicides, right?
Pesticides.
Yeah. So whenever you disrupt soil like that via tillage, that burns carbon up. So think soil as just this big matrix of carbon and nitrogen, right, and other compounds, but we'll talk about carbon and nitrogen.
Okay.
Well, every time
Make it simple for me, please.
Yeah, every time you turn that soil over, right, which you'll see here around this time of year, they're starting to disc right now, right, you're just releasing carbon. Right. So when we look at life cycle assessments, which is basically just think of an Excel spreadsheet where we just calculate emissions using different equations, we look at life cycle assessments of organic producers. In a lot of the regions, they have larger footprints because they produce less and produce less yield. And they have higher emissions per unit of product produced.
Okay. So ideally, like in the country, where are we at? How far along are we in being sustainable, in your opinion?
Yeah, so we do a lot of things really well, and we do things not well.
We could do things better.
We have some issues. I was just talking with somebody this morning. I think we have some issues with nitrogen in the feedlot industry, right? Overall, though, when you compare our production footprint to other countries around the world, we are very, very efficient. We produce crops and livestock really, really efficiently and with a small footprint per unit of product. And so we do some things really, really well from that lens. But production efficiency is not everything, right? If we want to actually make a difference in climate change, absolute emissions is what we need to focus on. And we still have a ways to go there because we have a lot of emissions in general, right? That's true for all sectors in the United States. We still have a long ways to go. But overall, I think we're in pretty good shape in the grand scheme of things.
So in your job at the university, what do you suggest? Like in your lectures, do you talk about suggestions on how we get there? How do we start? If we haven't started yet, if some companies haven't started yet. So do you talk about that a lot in school to your students?
Yes, one of my favorite things is when companies make a giant commitment around sustainability, like a net zero greenhouse gas.
Is that possible?
This is one of my favorite things. They like to make these claims, and then they call you and they go, "What's our roadmap to actually achieving this?"
They have no
I didn't
plan.
make the claim, so I don't know what you want me to tell you.
Have you ever seen The Office? And it's like that episode when Michael Scott is up there with the board and he's like, we have a 5-step plan for financial freedom and blah, blah, blah. And then they go to the back and they're like, why did you promise a plan? He's like, all right, I think we should put a plan together. I think that's a lot of what's happening is like, we're going to be carbon neutral. Okay, how do we do that?
Exactly, that's what's happening. And so companies are, in my opinion, this is really beneficial, working with producers across sectors a lot more now than they were, say, 10 years ago when I went down this path of sustainability. So I think that's a really, really good step and something that will ultimately lead to positive outcomes because we can only replicate so much in a controlled research environment, but producers are the ones who are going to be on the ground, right? And that's your emission footprint on the B side of things. So I really like that they're working with and partnering with producers to begin researching and try to develop new management strategies.
No, exactly. I mean, it's good and it's like probably easy to put it on paper, but then what? You need someone to actually start doing it.
And I think when you start doing it, you find it's a little harder than, I think that's in all research, though. It's not just sustainability. I mean, we know this.
It's easier said than done.
You go make noodles. None of these made noodles.
I've been on it for how long?
Yeah. So I think that's
decade?
just like life, honestly. I'm not even going to say that's just research. It's like anything you set your mind to, you can do it and you can achieve it. But you're going to hit road bumps and it's going to be harder along the way. So I think just being realistic about these plans and these goals is
just be realistic first. Don't claim something right away, but just step back and like plan. So it seems like you're really passionate about this, like this topic. Like what else are you passionate about?
Yeah, so when I went down this path of sustainability, I never thought that I would be working in greenhouse gas emissions for a living. My real passion is the industry at large, and keeping rural communities like thriving. You know, we do struggle with that across the United States. I've lived, Rachel, how many states have we lived in? Like 6,
Yeah.
in all different time
Me
zones
more.
and regions.
Uh-huh.
This is just since we went to grad school,
Yeah.
really. And rural communities across the U.S. are struggling, and those communities depend on agriculture. Right? Whether that's livestock or crops, it doesn't matter. And so I'm really passionate about helping our producers find the solutions for this latest issue that they're having to deal with. In ag, we always have issues. Right? On the livestock side, the previous issue was animal welfare. Now we've made a lot of really good progress on that. Now it's sustainability. Right? So just working with them to help develop those new management strategies and keep them in operation, for generations to come. That's what I would ultimately like to see.
Oh, good. Is that why you're in Kansas? Because Kansas is better than everywhere else?
I don't think any regions are isolated in any of these issues. I think they can look different in different regions, but they definitely, no region is
No region is
issueless.
better than the other
Yeah.
one.
So as we were going through, and I live this every day as I talk to suppliers, and I'm, living in the food industry, and we have these sustainable goals, and maybe not everyone understands what they mean, but I've been asked a lot, and going through at IFT, I saw this a lot, of regenerative ag. So can you tell us a little bit about what regenerative agriculture is and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. Regenerative ag is just kind of the latest buzzword, if you will, in some respects, coming out of sustainability. But it really has roots in the organic movement, which we've already discussed, right? So the organic movement came about in the 1930s and 40s, came stateside in the 50s and 60s, and then ultimately became regenerative organic around the 80s, and now we just call it regenerative ag. The thought being that it's not enough to just keep your landscape healthy and functioning. You need to restore your landscape at the same time. Right? And so regenerative can have varying numbers and levels of principles, but overall it's increased diversity or improved diversity, if you want to call it that, as I just did. Then keep soil covered. So keeping soil covered keeps it at a good temperature, keeps moisture in there, right? Reduces nutrient loss and evaporation from the soil surface. Incorporate livestock where possible. So in livestock systems, that's really easy. They're there. But in cropping systems, we see massive benefits incorporating livestock into those systems, not just in terms of soil health, but reducing pesticide and herbicide resistance. Massive benefits. And then also, we have reduce external inputs is another key area. So a key word there is reduce. It's not take away, right? What we might see in the organic label, it's very restrictive on the tools that you have in your toolbox. Regenerative ag is saying don't take tools out, just don't rely on them to produce the products that you're producing, right? So keep the tools available when appropriate, right? And there's a lot of claims out there about what regenerative ag can do. Most of it is surrounding carbon sequestration because everybody wants to sequester a lot of carbon. In general, I say when you're in an area that has rainfall, you can sequester a lot of carbon. When you're in areas that don't have a lot of rainfall, think Western United States, the arid West, it's much more difficult, right? And that's because soil microbes, just like us people, they like a little bit of moisture in order to work properly, right? So it varies across the board how effective it is, but overall, I like it, and I see a lot of producers that get a lot of benefit out of practicing regenerative principles. But in terms of the claims that surround it, it's so hard to adequately and accurately quantify that. I try to keep people away from making those claims surrounding regenerative ag.
So our overarching is sustainability is a moving target.
Yes.
It is hard to define.
Yes.
It is hard to measure,
Yes.
But it's still attainable.
but it's important and obtainable.
Yes.
In essence. Boy, I learned a lot today. Thank you. And now I can form my own opinion about sustainability.
Yeah.
Well,
Now looking at that package at the grocery store, you're gonna be
I
like,
know. I'll be like, okay, where's is this sustainable?
mm-hmm.
But then again, my opinion in $5 gives you $5. So,
Yeah.
but thank you for all the information, and I can feel the chemistry here the whole time. I'm like, wow, this is my favorite couple right here, husband and wife team.
I promise we don't just talk about sustainability at home. We do have fun.
Well, you
I
should.
would like to, though.
What if
I think we're good with the amount that we do.
We'll
Well,
talk about that offline.
this is a couple that enjoys talking about the environment and how we can make it better. So, unfortunately, we have to wrap things up, but I have one more question. So, in a sustainably sourced nutshell, what is sustainability for you in one word? Just one word.
Viable.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Rachel?
Um,
Yes.
yes.
Viable. Sustainability is viable.
Yes. I
Wow.
think that's a good
That's
one.
very inspiring.
I'll steal
actually.
his. So viable times 2.
Viable too. Well, thank you, Logan. Thank you, Rachel. And again, this has been fun. And I hope you join us again in the next episode of Straight Talk about Smart Food. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
MGP's food scientists are here to solve your culinary challenges. Contact us to discuss how we can help provide delicious solutions for you. Go to mgpingredients.com and click Contact Us.
The decision to purchase any food products is entirely at the discretion of the customer. Reference to any specific food products in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement by MGP. MGP Ingredients Inc. acknowledges that third-party trademarks referenced in this podcast are the registered trademarks or service marks of their respective owners. Reference to such third-party trademarks is not intended to apply any affiliation, endorsement, sponsorship, or relationship between MGP and the respective trademark owners.